The conference room on the 43rd floor smelled like leather and old money. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed downtown Chicago, like a painting, Lake Michigan stretching endlessly to the east, the morning sun casting long shadows across the skyline. Inside, the air was heavy with expectation and the faint hum of the ventilation system working overtime against the August heat. Marcus Thornwell sat at the head of the mahogany table, his custom suit probably worth more than most people's monthly rent. At 67, he wore his wealth the way some men wear cologne, liberally, unapologetically. His silver hair was slicked back, his watch caught the light with every dismissive gesture, and his smile held the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no in any meaningful way. Across from him sat 12 board members of Thornwell Industries, a textile empire built over 4 decades of ruthless expansion and strategic acquisitions. These weren't just executives. They were guardians of a legacy worth north of $800 million. And today, they'd gathered for what Marcus assumed would be a formality, the reading of his estate plan. Not because he was dying, God, no. Marcus felt invincible, but his attorneys had insisted. Update the documents, make it official, ensure continuity. So here they were, leather portfolios open, pens poised, ready to rubber stamp whatever the old man wanted. Gentlemen, Marcus began, leaning back in his chair with the ease of someone who'd never doubted his place in a room. We all know why we're here. I've built something that will outlast me. And when I'm gone, hopefully not for another 30 years, he paused for the polite laughter that came on cue. I want to make sure it stays in the right hands. He gestured toward his son, sitting 2 seats down. Gregory Thornwell, 41, looked like a younger, softer version of his father. Same jawline, less conviction. Gregory had spent most of his adult life in Marcus's shadow, managing regional operations, nodding at meetings, waiting for his turn. Greg's earned this, Marcus continued. He's been groomed for it. He understands the business. The legacy continues. Heads nodded around the table. This was expected, predictable. The Thornwell name would remain on the letterhead, the son would inherit the kingdom, and life would go on as it always had. Then the door opened. Not a polite knock and gradual entrance. Just open. The kind of interruption that doesn't ask permission. A young woman stepped inside. She couldn't have been more than 26, maybe 27. She wore dark jeans, a plain white button-down shirt, and sneakers that squeaked slightly against the polished floor. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup, no jewelry except for a simple silver watch on her left wrist. She carried a worn leather messenger bag over one shoulder and a manila folder in her hands. She looked out of place, like someone who'd wandered into the wrong building, the wrong floor, the wrong life. But her eyes told a different story. They were calm, steady. The kind of eyes that had already decided something important and weren't interested in being talked out of it. "Can we help you?" Marcus's assistant, Carol, stood immediately, her voice tight with the kind of irritation reserved for people who don't respect closed doors. The young woman didn't look at Carol. She looked directly at Marcus. "My name is Elena Cortez," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear, carrying across the room like a single note in an empty church. "And I'm here to claim my inheritance." Silence. Not the thoughtful kind. The stunned kind. The what did she just say kind. Marcus stared at her for 3 full seconds, his brain clearly trying to process whether this was a prank, a mental health episode, or some elaborate scam. Then he did what powerful men often do when confronted with absurdity. He laughed. It started as a chuckle, low and dismissive, then grew into something fuller, louder. A few board members joined in nervously, unsure if they were supposed to, but unwilling to be left out. "You're here to claim your—" Marcus couldn't even finish the sentence. He wiped his eyes, still grinning, Sweetheart, I don't know what you've been told, or who put you up to this, but you've got the wrong room. Maybe the wrong city. Elena didn't smile, didn't flinch. She just stood there, waiting for the laughter to run its course like rain against a windshield. I'm his daughter, she said simply, and I have proof. The laughter stopped. Gregory leaned forward, his face tight. Dad, what is this? Marcus's smile faded, replaced by something harder, colder. I have no idea. Carol, call security. But before Carol could reach for the phone, one of the board members, Daniel Frost, the company's chief legal counsel, held up a hand. Wait. Everyone turned to look at him. Daniel was in his early 60s, bald, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of calm demeanor that came from spending decades navigating corporate law. He wasn't easily rattled, but right now his face was pale. Let her speak, he said quietly. Marcus's jaw tightened. Daniel, this is a waste of... Let her speak. The room held its breath. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a single document. She placed it on the table and slid it toward Daniel, not Marcus. My mother's name was Sophia Cortez, she began, her voice steady despite the 12 pairs of eyes locked on her. She worked as a housekeeper for the Thornwell family in 1997. She was 19 years old. Marcus Thornwell was 43. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. Marcus's face went from dismissive to stone in half a second. This is slander, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Whatever game you're playing... I'm not playing anything, Elena interrupted. Her voice didn't rise, didn't waver. I'm telling you what happened, and I have documentation to prove every word. Daniel picked up the document she'd placed on the table. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. His expression didn't change, but his breathing did. Slower, more deliberate. The kind of breathing you do when you're trying to stay calm. Gregory stood up. Dad, what is she talking about? Marcus didn't answer. He was staring at Elena now, really staring, like he was trying to see past the present moment into something buried deep in memory. Elena continued. My mother came to the United States from Puebla, Mexico in 1996. She was undocumented, working under the table, sending money home to her family. She got a job cleaning houses in Evanston through an agency. One of those houses belonged to you. The room was silent except for the faint rustle of Daniel, turning pages. She worked for you for 8 months, Elena said. During that time, she became pregnant. When she told you, you gave her $5,000 in cash and told her to disappear. She was terrified. She didn't speak fluent English. She had no legal status, so she took the money and left. Marcus's hands were flat on the table now, fingers spread wide like he was trying to keep the earth from shifting beneath him. That's a lie, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Elena reached into her bag again and pulled out a photograph. She placed it on the table. This is my mother, Sophia Cortez. October 1997. 3 months pregnant. The photograph showed a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes, standing in front of a modest apartment building somewhere in the city. She was wearing a server's uniform, black pants, white shirt, the kind worn in 1,000 diners across America. Her hand rested on her stomach. Not obviously pregnant yet, but there was something in her expression. Hope, maybe, or fear, or both. Daniel looked at the photo, then at Marcus. Do you recognize this woman? He asked carefully. Marcus said nothing, but his silence was louder than any denial. Gregory sank back into his chair, his face pale. Dad? Elena's voice softened, just slightly. She never asked you for anything after that day, Not money, not acknowledgement, nothing. She worked 2 jobs, waitressing during the day, cleaning offices at night. She raised me alone. She taught me English. She made sure I went to school. She died 4 years ago from breast cancer because she couldn't afford treatment until it was too late. The air in the room felt thinner now, harder to breathe. I'm not here for revenge, Elena said quietly. I'm not here to destroy anyone's reputation or tear down what you've built. I'm here because the law says I have a right to know who my father is. And if that father has an estate, I have a right to be considered in it. Daniel set the photograph down and looked at Marcus. We need to verify this. There's nothing to verify, Marcus snapped, his composure cracking at the edges. This is extortion. She walks in here with some story, a picture of a random woman, and you're just going to... I have a DNA test, Elena said. Every head in the room turned. She reached into her folder and pulled out a sealed envelope from a certified lab in Milwaukee. I had it done 6 months ago. I used a sample from a water bottle you drank from at a public fundraiser last March at the Palmer House. It's not admissible in court because you didn't consent, but it was enough to confirm what my mother told me before she died. Daniel took the envelope, broke the seal, and read the contents. His face remained professionally neutral, but his eyes gave him away. Shock, disbelief, and something else. Recognition that this was real. The results show a 99.7% probability of paternity, Daniel said aloud, his voice carefully measured. The room erupted. Board members started talking over each other. Gregory stood again, his voice rising. This can't be. Dad, tell them this isn't. But Marcus wasn't listening. He was staring at Elena with an expression that was hard to read. Not quite anger, not quite fear. Something in between. Something like the slow, sickening realization that the past doesn't always stay buried. Elena stood perfectly still, her hands folded in front of her, waiting. I want an official test, Marcus finally said, his voice tight. Court-ordered, supervised. If you're so sure, then we do this properly. Agreed, Elena said without hesitation. Daniel nodded. I'll arrange it. We'll use an independent lab, chain of custody protocols, the works. Results in 2 weeks. Marcus pushed his chair back and stood, his face flushed. This meeting is over. No, Daniel said firmly. It's not. Marcus turned to him, incredulous. Excuse me? If there's even a possibility, this claim is legitimate, Daniel said, meeting his gaze. Then we have a fiduciary duty to pause any estate decisions until it's resolved. That's not optional, Marcus. That's the law. The days that followed felt like watching a slow-motion car crash. Marcus Thornwell hired 3 attorneys. Not the company's lawyers, his own. The kind who specialized in making problems disappear, in finding procedural loopholes and technicalities that could bury inconvenient truths under mountains of paperwork. Elena, meanwhile, returned to her 1-bedroom apartment in Pilsen, a neighborhood on Chicago's Lower West Side, where murals covered brick walls and the smell of fresh tortillas drifted from corner stores. She worked as a junior architect at a small firm downtown, designing affordable housing projects, living on a salary that wouldn't cover Marcus's monthly car payment. But she didn't look worried. She'd been preparing for this moment for 4 years, ever since her mother, Sophia, had told her the truth from a hospice bed in Little Company of Mary Hospital, her voice weak but steady. There's something you need to know about your father. Elena had always known she didn't have one, not in any real sense. No name on the birth certificate, no photos, no stories, just absence. Her mother had always said he was gone, and that was enough. But as Sophia's body failed, as the cancer spread beyond what morphine could manage, the truth came out. Not with bitterness. Sophia wasn't bitter. She was tired. I don't want you to hate him, Sophia had whispered, her fingers laced with Elena's. I want you to know who you are. where you come from. That's all. Elena had promised. And after her mother died, after the funeral, where 12 people gathered in a Catholic church that smelled like incense and old wood, Elena had started digging. It wasn't hard to find Marcus Thornwell. The man had buildings named after him. But proving the connection, that took time. That took patience. That took showing up at public events, collecting discarded items, running tests, building a case that couldn't be dismissed as fantasy or fraud. And now, here she was. The court-ordered DNA test was scheduled for a Friday morning at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, conducted under the supervision of an independent medical examiner and witnessed by attorneys from both sides. Marcus arrived in a black town car, flanked by his legal team. Elena arrived on the L train, carrying the same messenger bag she'd brought to the boardroom. They didn't speak. The process took 20 minutes. A cheek swab for each of them, sealed, labeled, logged. The samples were sent to a lab in St. Louis that specialized in forensic paternity testing. Results would take 10 business days. Marcus left without looking at her. Elena thanked the nurse and took the train home. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. 10 days felt like 10 years. Gregory Thornwell spent the time in meetings with his own attorneys, trying to understand what this meant for him, for the company, for the inheritance he'd been raised to expect. He wasn't angry at Elena, not exactly. He was angry at the situation, at the uncertainty, at the possibility that his entire understanding of his family was about to shift. Daniel Frost, the chief legal counsel, spent the time reviewing trust documents, corporate bylaws, and estate laws. If Elena's claim was validated, the legal ramifications were enormous, not just for the family, but for the company. Shareholders would ask questions. Competitors would smell blood. The press would have a field day. And Marcus? Marcus didn't sleep much. He sat in his penthouse overlooking the lake, drinking scotch that cost more per bottle than Sophia had made in a month. And he remembered. Not everything. Memory is selective, self-serving. But enough. He remembered a young woman with dark hair who cleaned his study on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He remembered her smile, shy and uncertain, when he offered her coffee. He remembered a night when his wife was out of town, when he'd had too much to drink, when the boundaries between power and desire blurred into something he told himself wasn't wrong because she hadn't said no. He remembered her coming to him 2 months later, nervous, speaking broken English, telling him she was pregnant. He remembered the fear in her eyes, not of him, but of everything. Deportation, poverty, the unknown. He remembered pulling $5,000 from his safe and pressing it into her hands. He remembered telling her it would be easier this way, better for everyone. He remembered her leaving. And then he remembered forgetting, not consciously, not deliberately, but the way people forget things that don't fit the story they tell themselves. The way powerful men forget the people they step over on the way to the top, until 26 years later, a young woman walks into a boardroom and forces him to remember. The results came back on a Wednesday. Daniel called a meeting. Same conference room, same table. But the energy was different now, heavier. Marcus sat in his usual seat, his face unreadable. Gregory sat beside him, hands folded. Elena sat across from them, her expression calm. Daniel opened the envelope in front of everyone. He read the contents silently first, his lips pressed into a thin line. Then he looked up. The test confirms a 99.9% probability of paternity, he said. Marcus Thornwell is Elena Cortez's biological father. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things unsaid, truths too heavy to speak aloud, futures rearranging themselves in real time. Gregory's face drained of color. Not anger, not resentment, Just loss. The loss of certainty. The loss of being the only heir, the only son, the only one who mattered in his father's eyes. Marcus sat perfectly still, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the table. For a man who'd spent his entire life controlling narratives, shaping outcomes, bending the world to his will, this moment was foreign territory. He couldn't negotiate his way out of biology. Elena exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping just a fraction. Not relief, she'd known the truth all along, but validation, the kind that comes from the world finally catching up to what you've carried alone for years. Daniel folded the document and set it down. This changes the legal landscape significantly. Elena has standing to contest the current estate plan. She's entitled to a portion of the inheritance under Illinois law, specifically the Probate Act's provisions for pretermitted children, those unintentionally omitted from a will. Unintentionally, Marcus muttered, the word bitter on his tongue. That's the legal term, Daniel said evenly. Whether the omission was intentional or not doesn't change her rights. Gregory finally spoke, his voice strained. How much? Daniel hesitated. That depends on several factors. The size of the estate, the number of heirs, how the assets are structured. But conservatively, she could be entitled to anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of the distributable estate. The number hung in the air like smoke. 1/2 of $800 million. Gregory stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. She shows up out of nowhere with proof, Daniel interrupted gently. Greg, I understand this is difficult, but the law is clear. The law, Gregory repeated, his voice rising. What about loyalty? What about the years I've spent building this company? What about... Greg. Marcus's voice cut through the room like a blade. Quiet, but sharp. Sit down. Gregory stared at his father, chest heaving, then slowly sank back into his chair. Marcus turned to Elena. It was the first time he'd really looked at her since the results were read. Studied her, the shape of her face, the set of her jaw, the way she held herself, poised, deliberate, like someone who'd learned early that the world wouldn't make room for her unless she demanded it. What do you want? He asked. Elena met his gaze. I told you. I want what's legally mine. What my mother should have been able to give me, security, recognition. A future that isn't built on overtime shifts and medical debt. You want money, Marcus said flatly. I want fairness, Elena corrected. There's a difference. Marcus leaned back, his fingers drumming against the armrest. And if I fight this, if I tie this up in court for years, drain the estate in legal fees, make this as painful as possible for everyone involved, then you'll prove exactly the kind of man my mother said you were, Elena said quietly. And I'll still be here when the dust settles. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel cleared his throat. There's another option. All eyes turned to him. Mediation, he said. Bring in a neutral third party, work out an agreement that's fair to everyone, and avoid the circus of a public trial. It's faster, cleaner, and it protects the company's reputation. Protects his reputation, you mean, Gregory muttered. Protects all of you, Daniel said firmly. The moment this goes to court, it becomes public record. Every detail, every deposition, every piece of dirty laundry. Is that really what you want? Marcus's jaw worked. He hated being cornered, hated the idea of negotiating with someone he'd dismissed as irrelevant for nearly 3 decades. But he was also pragmatic, and Daniel was right. A court battle would be a bloodbath. Fine, Marcus said finally. Mediation. But I want this resolved quickly. Daniel nodded. I'll reach out to a mediator. We can schedule something within the next 2 weeks. Elena stood, gathering her folder. I'll be there. As she turned to leave, Marcus spoke again. Why now? She paused, her hand on the back of the chair. "What? Why now?" Marcus repeated. "You could have done this years ago. Why wait until—" He stopped himself, but the question was clear. "Why wait until I'm planning my estate? Why wait until there's money on the table?" Elena turned back to face him, and for the first time, there was something other than calm in her eyes, something raw. "Because 4 years ago I held my mother's hand while she died in a hospital bed that cost more per night than she made in a week," she said, her voice steady but edged with steel. "And I promised her that I wouldn't let her story disappear, that I wouldn't let her be erased like she never mattered. So no, Mr. Thornwell, this isn't about timing. It's about honoring the woman who gave me everything while you gave her nothing." She didn't wait for a response. She walked out, the door closing softly behind her. Gregory stared at the space where she'd been standing, then looked at his father. "Dad, did you know? All this time, did you know she existed?" Marcus didn't answer. He just stared at the table, his empire suddenly feeling a lot smaller than it had that morning. The mediation was held in a neutral office building in the Loop, one of those corporate spaces that rents out conference rooms by the hour. Beige walls, standard-issue furniture, a water cooler in the corner that nobody used, the kind of place designed to be forgettable. But what happened inside wasn't. The mediator was a woman named Patricia Henley, a retired judge with silver hair and the kind of presence that made people sit up straighter without her saying a word. She'd spent 30 years on the bench in Cook County, presiding over everything from contract disputes to custody battles. She didn't take sides, she didn't waste time, and she didn't tolerate nonsense. "Here's how this works," Patricia said, settling into her chair at the head of the table. "We're here to find a solution that everyone can live with. Not love, live with. This isn't about winning. It's about resolving. Understood?" Marcus, flanked by his attorneys, nodded curtly. Elena, sitting with a single lawyer she'd hired, a sharp young woman named Rachel Park who specialized in estate law, nodded as well. Gregory was there too, his presence a reminder that this wasn't just about money, it was about family, or the wreckage of what should have been one. Patricia opened her folder. "I've reviewed the DNA results, the estate documents, and the relevant case law. Elena, you have a legitimate claim. Marcus, you have options for how to address it. Let's start with what Elena is asking for." Rachel leaned forward. "My client is seeking recognition as a legal heir and an equitable distribution of the estate consistent with Illinois law. We're not asking for the entire estate. We're asking for what she's entitled to, a fair share." One of Marcus's attorneys, a man named Jeffrey Brennan, with a reputation for scorched earth litigation, smirked. "And what, in your estimation, is fair? Half? A third? Let's put a number on this." Elena spoke before Rachel could respond. "I want what Gregory would get if your father had 2 children instead of 1. That's it. I'm not trying to take everything. I'm trying to be acknowledged." "Acknowledged," Gregory muttered. "You want $400 million to feel acknowledged?" "I want," Elena said, her voice sharpening just slightly, "to not spend the rest of my life wondering if I mattered, to not carry the weight of being erased. You grew up with a father, Gregory. You grew up with security, with opportunities, with a name that opened doors. I grew up with nothing. So yes, I want acknowledgement. And yes, I want compensation for what that absence cost me." The room fell silent. Patricia looked at Marcus. "Do you have a counter-proposal?" Marcus's lead attorney started to speak, but Marcus held up a hand. "Let me." He looked directly at Elena. "I'll give you $10 million. Cash. No, strings. You sign an NDA, you walk away, and you never speak about this again." Elena didn't blink. "No. 20 million. No. 30. No." Marcus' face flushed. What do you want, then? To bleed me dry? To destroy everything I've built? I want, Elena said quietly, to be treated like your daughter, not a mistake you're trying to bury. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hit you the hardest in the story, and share your thoughts in the comments. The words landed like a gavel. Gregory looked away, his jaw tight. Marcus stared at her, something unreadable flickering across his face. Patricia folded her hands and waited. If you're his daughter, Rachel said carefully, then you're entitled to what any other child would receive. That's the legal standard, and that's what we're seeking. Jeffrey Brennan shook his head. Your client didn't grow up as part of this family. She didn't contribute to the business. She didn't get the chance, Rachel interrupted. Because your client made a choice 26 years ago to pretend she didn't exist. That's not her fault. That's his. Marcus slammed his hand on the table, the sound sharp and sudden. I made a mistake. I admit it. But I'm not going to let one mistake define the rest of my life. It already has, Elena said softly. It's defined mine. The room went quiet again. Patricia leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. Marcus, let me be very clear. If this goes to court, the judge will look at the facts. A biological father who knowingly excluded a child from his estate. A child who has proven paternity through DNA evidence. Illinois law does not look kindly on that. You could lose more than half the estate in legal fees alone, not to mention the judgment. So I'm going to ask you again. Do you have a proposal that addresses Elena's claim in a meaningful way? Marcus's jaw worked. His attorneys exchanged glances. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. She gets 10% of the estate, distributed in a trust, no lump sum, managed by an independent trustee. 30%, Rachel countered immediately. Lump sum option available. 15. 25. 20. Patricia looked at Elena. What do you think? Elena was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. Then she nodded. 20%. But I want something else. Marcus frowned. What? I want my mother's name on a scholarship fund, Elena said. The Sofia Cortez Memorial Scholarship. For first-generation college students from immigrant families. Funded by the estate. Permanent. Marcus stared at her. Why? Because she deserved to be remembered, Elena said simply. And because I want something good to come from this. The agreement took 3 more hours to finalize. 20% of the distributable estate, roughly $160 million, would go to Elena Cortez, with provisions for both immediate access and long-term. Trust management. The Sofia Cortez Memorial Scholarship would be established with an initial endowment of $5 million, renewable annually, administered through a foundation independent of Thornwell Industries. In exchange, Elena would waive any further claims against the estate and agree to a limited confidentiality clause. She could tell her story, but she couldn't disclose specific financial details or use the Thornwell name commercially. Gregory signed the documents without a word, his face unreadable. Marcus signed last, his hands steady but his eyes distant, like he was signing away more than money. When it was done, Patricia stood and shook everyone's hands. This was the right outcome, not easy but right. Elena gathered her things and walked toward the door. Marcus called after her. Elena? She stopped, turned. He stood there, this man who'd built an empire, who'd shaped industries, who'd made a fortune out of fabric and ambition. And for the first time, I looked small. I'm sorry, he said. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was just true. Elena looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded once and left. In the weeks that followed, the news broke quietly, not in headlines, but in whispers. Business circles buzzed with rumors. A previously unknown heir, a settlement, questions about what this meant for the company's future. Marcus issued a brief statement through his publicist. I have recently learned of a daughter I did not previously know existed. We have reached an amicable resolution, and I wish her well. Elena didn't issue a statement. She went back to work, back to her apartment in Pilsen, back to a life that now included financial security, but hadn't fundamentally changed who she was. The first Sofia Cortez Memorial Scholarship was awarded 6 months later to a young woman from Juarez who'd crossed the border at 15 and was now studying engineering at the University of Illinois. Elena attended the ceremony, standing in the back of the room, watching the recipient give a tearful speech about second chances and the kindness of strangers. She thought about her mother, about the sacrifices Sofia had made, the dreams she'd deferred, the dignity she'd maintained, even when the world offered her none. And she thought about the man who'd fathered her, the man who'd erased her, the man who'd finally, grudgingly acknowledged she existed. She didn't hate him. Hate required energy she didn't want to spend. But she didn't forgive him either. Forgiveness required a kind of reconciliation that hadn't happened, might never happen. What she felt was something more complicated. Sadness, maybe. For what could have been. For the childhood she didn't get. For the grandfather Sofia never became to any grandchildren Elena might have someday. But also relief. Because the fight was over. Because her mother's name would live on. Because she'd done what she set out to do. Not for revenge, not for money, but for recognition. For the simple, stubborn insistence that she mattered. A year later, Elena received a letter. It came in a plain envelope, no return address, postmarked from Chicago. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in shaky cursive. Elena, I've thought about what to say to you for months. I've written this letter a dozen times and thrown away every draft because nothing feels adequate. I can't undo the past. I can't give you back the years you spent without a father, or ease the burden your mother carried alone. I can't rewrite history to make myself the man I should have been. But I want you to know that I think about you. More than you might imagine. I see your name when the scholarship recipients are announced. I see your mother's name, and I remember her, not as I wanted to, not as a convenient ghost, but as a real person who deserved better than I gave her. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to ask for it. But I wanted you to know that acknowledging you wasn't just a legal formality. It changed me. It forced me to see the cost of my choices in ways I'd avoided for decades. If you ever want to talk, not about money, not about the past, just talk, I'd like that. But I understand if you don't. Marcus Elena read the letter 3 times, standing in her kitchen as the afternoon light slanted through the window. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in a drawer, and made herself a cup of tea. She didn't respond. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she kept the letter. Because some doors, once opened, don't fully close. They stay ajar, letting in drafts of possibility, slivers of light that weren't there before. And maybe someday she'd walk through. Or maybe she wouldn't. Either way, it was her choice now. Not his. 2 years after the mediation, Elena stood on the corner of Halstead and 18th Street, watching construction crews frame out the walls of a new building. It was a small development, 40 units of affordable housing, designed with wide windows and rooftop gardens, built to serve families who'd been priced out of neighborhoods they'd called home for generations. This was her project, her design, her name on the blueprints. The settlement money had given her options. She could have quit her job, traveled the world, lived a life of leisure that would have made her mother's sacrifices feel validated in some material way. But that wasn't who she was. Sofia hadn't raised her to rest. She'd raised her to build. So Elena had stayed at the architecture firm, taken on more responsibility, and poured the settlement funds into a nonprofit she'd founded, Casa Sofia, named after her mother, dedicated to creating housing solutions for immigrant families navigating the impossible math of the American dream. Work 3 jobs, save every penny, and still come up short when rent is due. The first building was opening in 3 months. Elena. She turned to see a familiar face approaching. Daniel Frost, Marcus's former chief legal counsel. He'd retired from Thornwell Industries a year earlier, citing a desire to spend more time with his grandchildren. But he still reached out occasionally, always polite, always respectful of boundaries. "Daniel," Elena said, surprised, "what brings you to Pilsen?" "You, actually," he said, a little sheepish. "I wanted to see the project. I've been following the news coverage. This is impressive." Elena smiled. "Thank you. It's been a journey." They stood together, watching the workers move across the scaffolding like dancers in a carefully choreographed routine. "I also came to tell you something," Daniel said after a moment. "Marcus passed away last week." Elena's breath caught. She'd known it would happen eventually. He was 70, a lifetime of stress and scotch catching up to him. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your chest are different things. "How?" she asked quietly. "Heart attack, quick. He didn't suffer." She nodded, processing. "How's Gregory?" "Handling it. The funeral is Saturday. Private, family only. But he wanted me to tell you, you're invited, if you want to come." Elena looked at him, searching his face for subtext. "Does he mean that, or is he just being polite?" Daniel smiled sadly. "I think he means it. Gregory's changed, Elena. The last 2 years, watching his father wrestle with what happened, seeing the scholarship fund grow. It shifted something in him. He's not the same person who sat in that boardroom looking at you like you were an invader." "And Marcus?" Elena asked. "Did he change?" Daniel considered the question carefully. "I don't know if people like Marcus change exactly, but I think he softened. He talked about you sometimes, wondered what you were doing. He never said it outright, but I got the sense he regretted not reaching out more after the settlement." Elena thought about the letter in her drawer, the one she'd never answered. "I don't know if I can go to the funeral," she said honestly. "I don't know what I'd even say." "You don't have to say anything," Daniel said gently. "But grief is strange. It has a way of surfacing things we didn't know we were carrying. Just think about it." He handed her a card with the funeral details and walked away, leaving Elena standing in the construction zone, surrounded by the sound of hammers and saws building something new from the ground up. Saturday came. Elena stood in front of her closet, staring at the black dress she'd bought for her mother's funeral. She hadn't worn it since, hadn't been to a funeral since. The idea of walking into a church filled with people who'd known Marcus as a titan of industry, who'd eulogize him as a visionary and a leader, felt surreal. Would they mention her, the daughter who came out of nowhere? Or would she be the silent footnote, the complication, the thing that didn't fit the narrative? She almost didn't go. But then she thought about Sophia, about the way her mother had taught her to face hard things with grace, to show up even when it was uncomfortable, to claim her space in the world without apology. So she put on the dress, pulled her hair back, and drove to the church. St. Clement Catholic Church in Lincoln Park was everything you'd expect. Stained glass, vaulted ceilings, the smell of incense, and old wood. The pews were filled with people in expensive suits, people who'd flown in from New York and Los Angeles, people whose presence was a testament to Marcus's reach and influence. Elena slipped into the back row, unnoticed. The service was formal, polished. A colleague gave a speech about Marcus's contributions to the textile industry. A longtime friend told a story about a fishing trip in Montana. Gregory stood at the podium and spoke about his father's work ethic, his drive, the impossible standards he set. He didn't mention Elena. But near the end, he paused, his voice catching slightly. My father wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. He hurt people. But in his final years, he tried to make things right. And I think that's worth something. Elena felt her throat tighten. After the service, as people filtered out into the sunlight, Gregory found her standing by the car. You came, he said. I almost didn't, she admitted. He nodded, hands in his pockets. I'm glad you did. They stood there, two people connected by blood and nothing else, navigating the impossible space between strangers and siblings. I'm sorry, Gregory said finally, for how I acted, for making this harder than it had to be. Elena looked at him, really looked, and she saw something she hadn't before. Not resentment, just exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying the weight of someone else's legacy. You were protecting your father, she said. I understand. I was protecting myself, he corrected. And I was wrong. They didn't become close after that, didn't suddenly transform into the kind of siblings who called each other on birthdays or met for coffee. But they reached an understanding, an acknowledgement that they were both shaped by the same man in vastly different ways, and that neither of them owed the other anything beyond basic human decency. A few months later, Gregory reached out with a proposal. Thornwell Industries wanted to partner with Casa Sofia, funding 3 new affordable housing developments across Chicago. It wasn't charity, it was investment, with Elena's nonprofit maintaining full creative control and ownership. It's what he would have wanted, Gregory said during their first planning meeting. Near the end, he talked about legacy differently, not just about what he built, but about what he left behind. I think he wanted to make sure your mother's name lived on in more than just a scholarship. Elena didn't cry often. She'd learned early that tears didn't change outcomes. But sitting in that conference room, reviewing blueprints for buildings that would house families like hers, carrying her mother's name into neighborhoods that had been forgotten by people like Marcus Thornwell, she felt something break open in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but something close to it, something like grace. The partnership flourished. Over the next 3 years, Casa Sofia expanded to 6 cities, housing over 1,500 families. The Elena Cortez Memorial Scholarship grew to serve 200 students annually. And Elena, quiet, determined Elena, who'd walked into a boardroom with nothing but the truth, became a voice in the national conversation about equitable housing and generational wealth. She gave a TEDx talk in Boston about inheritance, not just financial, but emotional. The legacies we carry, the debts we're born into, the ways we choose to honor or reject the people who came before us. She spoke about her mother without bitterness, about Marcus without hatred, about Gregory without resentment. I didn't come looking for revenge, she said, standing on that stage in front of 800 people. I came looking for acknowledgement, for the simple, radical idea that I existed, that my mother existed, that our stories mattered. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, a young woman approached her, maybe 23, dark hair, nervous smile. My mom was a housekeeper too, the woman said quietly. And I needed to hear this. Thank you. Elena hugged her, this stranger who wasn't really a stranger at all, and thought about all the Sofias out there. All the women working invisible jobs, raising children in the margins, building futures out of scraps and hope. And she thought about the fact that her mother's name was now carved into buildings, printed on scholarship checks, spoken at ceremonies and conferences. Elena Cortez would never be erased. 5 years after the mediation, Elena received another letter. This time, it was from Gregory. Elena, I've been thinking a lot about what family means, about how we define it, by blood, by choice, by the experiences we share. You and I don't have a typical sibling relationship. We didn't grow up together. We don't have shared memories of childhood or inside jokes or arguments over who got the last piece of cake. But we have something else. We have the messy, complicated truth of being connected by a man who failed us both in different ways. And we have the choice of what to do with that connection. I'm not asking for us to be best friends, but I am asking if you'd like to have dinner sometime. No agenda, no lawyers, just two people trying to figure out what it means to be family when the traditional definition doesn't quite fit. Let me know. Gregory Elena read the letter sitting on the rooftop of the first Casa Sofia building, the one she'd watched rise from concrete and rebar into something real and permanent. The city stretched out around her, millions of stories, millions of lives intersecting and diverging in ways both planned and accidental. She thought about her mother's advice, whispered from a hospital bed. I don't want you to hate him. She thought about Marcus's letter, the one she'd kept but never answered. I wanted you to know that acknowledging you wasn't just a legal formality. It changed me. She thought about all the ways people hurt each other and all the ways they try, sometimes clumsily, sometimes too late, to make it right. Then she pulled out her phone and texted Gregory. Dinner sounds good. When? The response came almost immediately. Next Tuesday? There's a place in Pilsen I've been wanting to try. Elena smiled. You pick the place. I'll pick the topic of conversation. Deal. That Tuesday, they sat across from each other in a small Mexican restaurant, the kind with plastic chairs and handmade tortillas and salsa that made your eyes water in the best way. They talked about work, about the partnership, about the challenges of affordable housing in a city that seemed determined to price out anyone who wasn't already wealthy. And then, somewhere between the second margarita and dessert, Gregory asked the question Elena had been waiting for. Do you think you'll ever forgive him? Elena was quiet for a long moment, turning her glass in her hands. I don't know, she said honestly. Forgiveness feels like something you give when the person asks for it directly, when they sit across from you and own what they did. He tried in his way, but it wasn't enough. Gregory nodded slowly. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? That surprised her. For what? For treating you like an enemy instead of family. For making that first meeting harder than it had to be. Elena looked at him. This man who'd spent his whole life in the shadow of a legacy, just like she had. Different shadows, same struggle. I already have, she said. His eyes glistened. Thank you. They finished their meal, paid the check, and walked out into the Chicago night. The air was cool, the streets alive with music and laughter, and the hum of a city that never quite went to sleep. Same time next month? Gregory asked. Yeah, Elena said. Same time. She watched him walk to his car, then turned toward the L station, her steps light. She thought about her mother, about the scared 19-year-old girl who'd crossed a border with nothing but hope and determination. She thought about the woman Sophia became, hardworking, resilient, and kind even when the world wasn't kind to her. And she thought about the legacy Sophia left behind. Not money, not buildings, but something more durable. The stubborn, unshakable belief that every person, no matter where they come from, no matter how invisible they're made to feel, deserves to be seen, to be acknowledged, to matter. Elena descended the stairs into the station, the sound of the approaching train, echoing through the tunnel. And as she stepped onto the platform, surrounded by tired workers heading home, and young people heading out, she realized something. She'd come looking for an inheritance. What she found was herself. If Elena's story moved you, if it made you think about legacy, acknowledgement, or the people who shape us in ways both seen and unseen. I'd love to hear from you. Hit that like button, drop a comment sharing what resonated most, and subscribe to Justice Tales for more stories about ordinary people navigating extraordinary circumstances. Where are you watching from? What part of Elena's journey hit you hardest? Let's talk about it below. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, every story deserves to be told.